Welcome to Scaling Up, the podcast for water treaters by water treaters, where we're scaling up on water treatment knowledge so we don't scale up our systems. Hi folks, I'm Trace Blackmore. I am the host of Scaling Up. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for trying some of the things that we're talking about on this show. I want to thank you for being a better water treater tomorrow than you are today. I have heard from many of you, and the things that I have been hearing proves to me that this show is worthwhile, and we as a water treatment group are scaling up on water treatment knowledge, hopefully so we're not scaling up our systems. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate all the information that you guys have been giving me, either through emailing me directly, calling me, or going to my webpage at scalinguph2o.com and going to the show notes page and telling me what you think. That's where I'm getting all my ideas from. That's where I'm getting my feedback from. That's what I know what to talk about. So I thank you for that. One of my favorite ways to tell people what it is that I do as a water treater is that I am a heat transfer efficiency manager. Everything we do revolves around that simple fact. We are making sure that all the equipment that we are treating is transferring that heat from where we don't want it to where we're going to send it to as efficiently as it possibly can go. Our job is heat transfer efficiency management. So with that in mind, my challenge to you is to go and look at all of your accounts and say, how am I doing this? Am I truly being an effective heat transfer efficiency manager? One of the things that I see when the mechanical contractor or even the water treater goes to hook up control equipment on a cooling tower, it's wherever we can get the easiest flow. Well, it's nice to have flow, but it's also important to make sure that we're drawing water from the right areas, making sure that we're efficiently managing that heat. Now, what am I talking about here? Think about the cooling tower bleed. Well, it doesn't matter where we bleed the cooling tower from. We're getting rid of that water anyway, so why not just take it where it's convenient off of the system and throw it down the drain? Well, you now know that you're a heat transfer efficiency manager, so you're going to look at this differently now. You're going to say, wait a second, as a water treater, my primary function is a heat transfer efficiency manager, and I now need to look at the system and see how I can do a better job of managing that heat transfer. So think about what's going on here. We're taking heat out of the building, and then ultimately it's going to the cooling tower, where the cooling tower is going to disperse that heat into the atmosphere. So we don't want the hot water. So wouldn't it make sense for us to bleed the hottest water out so we can get rid of it? Now we know that that high solids hot water that we're bleeding out is going to be replaced with low solids cooler makeup water. So why would we ever bleed water that we paid to cool? We pumped it out to the cooling tower, we had those fans kick on, and we pumped it all the way back, and then we're going to bleed it out. It doesn't make sense, especially when we're heat transfer efficiency managers. So the next time you install a system, think about bleeding the hottest water out, knowing that we don't want that hot water in there anyway. We can replace it with the cool incoming low solids makeup water, and now the system is a little bit more efficient. I'm here today with Conor Parrish of FCT Water. And Conor, I'm going to let the cat out of the bag because people don't know this, but you were the driving force that pushed me to produce this podcast. So folks out there, if you do not like this show, you now have somebody to blame. How are you doing, Conor?
I'm doing well, Trace. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well. Conor, one of the reasons I wanted you on the show is, quite frankly, I'm really impressed with the amount of time that you've been in the water treatment business, which is not very long, and the amount of knowledge that you've been able to pick up And one of the themes of this show is how can we become a better water treater tomorrow from what we were today? And I really think that you live that. So I'm hoping through today's interview, you can share some tips and some ideas that you do on a regular basis that might motivate somebody, hey, I can do that too, and they're also going to be a better water treater tomorrow than they are today. How does that sound?
That sounds great.
Well, Conor, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got involved in water treatment, where you went to school, things like that.
Okay, so I guess a good place to start would be college. I went to Drake University in Des Moines, Iowa. It's a small private school there. My family is from the Midwest. I grew up in Kansas City, had family in Des Moines, and decided that would be a good fit. From Des Moines, I ended up out here in Colorado working for FCT Water through some connections I made at Drake. Knew I wanted to be in Colorado, and actually knew about the water treatment industry because of my dad. He works for a company, CE Water, in Kansas City. So when the opportunity to work for a water treatment company presented itself to me, I was maybe the rare case of actually knowing what exactly water treatment was. Now, I've learned a lot since then that there's a whole lot more to it than what I thought I understood that it was. But I knew enough to know that it would be an interesting career, and decided to jump on in and really commit to learning it and getting to where I am today.
Well, Conor, how long have you been in the industry?
Oh, I started on January 5th, 2015. So what is that? A little over 2 years now, 2 years, 4 months.
And what do you like most about this industry?
I think the biggest thing for me is that it's dynamic. I'm not very good at sitting around and doing one thing all day. I need to be challenged in different ways. So with water treatment, you have the technical piece, the science piece, which I loved. I was an environmental science major at Drake. Really loved digging into the why and the theory and all that, which I get to do with water treatment, which is fantastic. I love dealing with people, and there's a lot of relationship building and dealing with all different types of people in the industry. And then really it's just not at a desk, which was important to me.
Well, let me ask the same question, but in the reverse. What do you like least about this job?
Probably the thing that I like least is how in most instances you're dealing in an imperfect environment. And what I mean by that is I like to know all the answers to all the variables and all the inputs into a system, and oftentimes that's not something that you're afforded in this industry. So it's been a little bit of an adjustment for me to get used to moving forward and working with incomplete information, and then working backwards once you learn a little bit more about a system that you're taking over, or an existing system that you're trying to learn more about. From your customer, and they just don't have the answers that you seem to want.
And then you got to, of course, guess until you find the answer. And
right, and that's a difficult thing for me. I want to, be very precise and know exactly what I'm getting into, and so I'm getting used to that, and I understand that it's a part of it, and really I'm coming to appreciate it because it makes it, in some ways, you become a detective or a researcher really trying to come to the bottom of what may be causing some problems that you're observing.
Well, Conor, I know one of the goals that you have is to get your certified water technologist designation. What are you doing to make sure that you're as prepared as you can be when the day comes that you can take that test?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things that I'm doing. I'm fortunate to work for a company that invests a whole lot in education. So I'm able to attend the AWT training seminars, which are incredible. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about, my involvement with the AWT and how I've benefited from that later on. But really, that's a big starting point because you're surrounded by, other CWTs or other people aspiring to be CWTs. And so it kind of really opens up your eyes to what the possibilities are. Now, in addition to that, I do a lot of reading. I've got the TRTM, the Technical Reference and Training Manual. And of course, that's fantastic. That's like my Bible. I like to say I read through that probably more than I should or care to admit. But I find it fascinating. The analyst is a big one. And then if I find something that I'm curious about, I'll just start Googling and reading. So maybe it's not directly related to the CWT, but I know if I build a breadth of knowledge that was, that's if I build my knowledge to a point where I've got a whole heck of a lot of it, then the CWT test in theory should be something that I'm able to pass. And then maybe the most important piece of it all is building relationships with existing CWTs and asking a lot of questions when there's something that I see that I don't understand and is not readily available and, typed out in a perfect answer for you to Google.
I will warn you that Angela Pike is a listener to this show, and the CWT is not a test. It is an examination. So you're going to get a phone call about that. I just want to let you know.
I know better about it as well. She lectured me for probably 10 minutes at one of the training seminars in San Diego this spring. So I apologize, Angela.
Something that our listeners, I'm betting, do not know is when they read the CWT requirements, it says you have to have 5 years in the industry. However, I know the CWT requirements actually give you the ability to take some time off of that if you have some of the prerequisite. Do you mind sharing some of the prerequisites that you have so our members now know?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, maybe verify all this with Angela. I don't want to get in trouble twice before in one interview with Angela. But I think if you have a technical degree, for one, a 4-year degree, then that gives you, you start off with 12 months of experience. And then if you have a technical degree in a relevant field, so for me, environmental science, applied, chemical engineering, chemistry, biology. I'm not 100% sure what degrees fall into that category. I assume all of those are one. But with that, you get an additional 6 months. So you start off really with 18 months, and that's what I was fortunate to have happen. So now, really, I only need 3.5 years in the field from an experience standpoint, and then, of course, passing the test and the letters of recommendations and all the other requirements for the CWT.
Yeah, I get a lot of questions on when am I eligible to take the examination. And folks, if you would, go online, download the packet that AWT has created to let you know all these things, because you might be eligible to, you can take the exam anytime you want, but to actually become a certified water technologist, you might be eligible a little sooner than you think. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the one thing I want to add to that, because I've been asking Angela about this because I do want to take the exam, is once you pass it, I believe it's only valid for 12 months. So you have to be within the 12 months of hitting your experience before you take the exam if you want it to count.
Good tip. Well, you had mentioned that you have been to several training seminars, and I know a lot of our listeners, they say, oh, I went to technical training or I went to the fundamentals and applications training 5 years ago. I don't need to go back because I've already been there. That's not the attitude that you share. Do you mind letting our listeners know why you find it valuable to go back each and every year?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess the first thing that comes to mind is I'm a huge nerd. So I actually enjoy sitting in class and learning and picking up on that. But I guess the important piece of that statement is I've gone 3 consecutive years now, and every single year I learn a lot. And that comes from, of course, the courses themselves and the training and the actual lecture portion. But maybe more importantly, especially now that I've done it 3 years, is the after hours or between session periods where you're able to interact with everyone that's there and, start to pick up on other issues that other people are having and learn from their experience. Ask the instructors questions that you may, normally have to pay quite a bit of money for as their consultants, and, their time's valuable. And then hanging out at night and just building those relationships that you're able to draw from in times that, that their experience will be able to help you.
What's the best piece of advice that you've received from one of the technical training seminars?
Oh, man. Now, that's a good question. I'm trying to think of something broad and not like a specific water treatment thing that, that has implications more than to just one thing. Probably nothing's jumping to mind, but, I think that one of the things that's really resonated with me is kind of in your training, actually, Trace, the calculations training or maybe it wasn't even the calculations training, but it was one of your trainings when you talk about, you don't want to be a bad water treater. And so that's always kind of a looming thing in the back of my mind is, okay, what do I need to do so I don't have a bad reputation from my competitors and everyone else in this room? And I want to be viewed in a light that, if someone's going to try and compete against me or beat me or whatever, it's not because of a mistake that I've made or just negligence. So I think that's one big piece of it is just understanding that, it's okay to not know everything, but as long as you're asking questions and seeking to understand what may actually be happening versus just ignoring a problem, then you're on the right path.
So who is your favorite trainer at the AWT training seminars?
I feel like this is a loaded question considering you're one of the trainers. But no, in all seriousness, I enjoy your sessions. You're animated in the training like you are here, and of course we've gotten close. So certainly you're one of my favorite trainers. And then the other one that really jumps out to me is Jim Lukanich. I've here recently gotten to know him a bit more, and him and I have a lot of shared interests, and he's very passionate about it, as are all the trainers, but he's outwardly passionate, very outwardly passionate, and I can kind of feed off of that energy. So on the last day of training when Jim's teaching and everyone else is dozing off, he makes it easy to stay focused and really feel energized at the end of the day and ready to go really back to work on Monday, even though it's already Saturday night.
Well, I will tell you that Jim is the trainer that all of us other trainers aspire to be. He truly is amazing. In fact, he's going to be a guest on our show in a couple of weeks, so please tune into that. Conor, as being a water treater, we spend a lot of time in our cars, and I know that you really utilize that time to learn more and to be better. Do you mind sharing what you actually do in your car, what you listen to our listeners?
Yeah, I very rarely listen to music, and the one time I listen to music is if I find myself probably more tired than I should be when I'm driving and I need the energy. But what I try to do really is twofold. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and that's kind of why I had mentioned to you that this would be a great idea and something that I would personally utilize a lot. As much content as you're able to put out, I think I told you I would listen. And then, another podcast that I listen to is the Tim Ferriss Show. I guess I could describe myself as a fanboy of the Tim Ferriss Show. I've listened to all of his episodes, and they're quite long. But again, we're in the car a lot, so it's a good one. And there's a lot to take away from his show, as he brings in a lot of high performers and kind of distills down the tools and tactics that they use to get to where they're at in their respective fields. And I think that's interesting, and I like to see if I can learn and take something and apply it to my life on that. And then the other thing that I do is I make a lot of phone calls. I've got hands free, and so I am able to just use my Siri or whatever and call you or call someone that I know is going to be able to answer questions that I may have, and just try and chat with them and take advantage of that time that I otherwise would just be spent doing nothing.
How would you go after a new account? What sales tips could you give our audience?
Well, I think the most important sales tip is you actually have to make sales calls. I know people don't want to hear that sometimes, but the starting point is going out there every day and showing up. And when I say sales calls, I mean stop in and visit a facility, even if you don't even have a contact's name. That's something that has been instilled into me from the owner of FCT Water, Mike Semeka, and it's really stuck, and it's proved to be successful. I mean, it takes time, of course, but that's the starting point. And then once you start getting more involved, I always like to sell from a positive standpoint, if that makes sense. I never want to really be negative about my competition. I want to be positive about, what FCT Water has to offer, what our knowledge and our customer service, and really understand what it is that is lacking in their current program that they want, what they're seeking, and then really trying just to meet their needs and their expectations. And it's not an easy process, as everyone who's listening to this knows, but I think as long as you come at it with honesty, and another big thing is don't pretend that you know everything, because oftentimes your customer knows a whole heck of a lot more than you think, and you don't want to come across as a know-it-all or say something that the customer knows is wrong. So I think that that's important as well.
And don't you find that even though you don't know the exact answer right then, if you commit to say, hey, I don't know that, but I'm going to get back to you, and then you do and you keep that commitment, that is so much more powerful than if you were just able to spout off an answer right there when they asked you?
Oh, absolutely. It shows that you're willing to put in some time and do some research to solve their problem, and I think that reflects on how your program would be for them as issues arise that you may or may not know the answer to. They'll feel confident that you're going to be able to go out there and do some research and get them the answer that they need to fix their problem. And yeah, so I think that that's huge. And the other piece of that is you're sticking to your word. If you make a commitment to do something and you actually do it in the time frame that you suggested you would, it's going to, reflect well on you as a person in your company.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many people I've seen that they will make up an answer just so they can have a reply right then and there, and that's not the way to do that. And you're living proof that, hey, people respect if you go out and find the answer and come back.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And as you already mentioned earlier, with my experience and age, sometimes that can be a barrier. But I think if you just show that you are technically competent, and you do know what you're talking about, and when you don't, you're willing to go out and put in the effort to learn it, and then share that knowledge that you just gained with the prospective customer or your own customer, that goes a long, long way.
And actually, you and I are very similar in that case. I got involved, actually started getting a paycheck in water treatment when I was 20 years old, so I know what you're going through. So eventually that gray hair will come whether you want it or not, and I think that helps you a little bit.
But yeah, no, I agree that the gray hair thing may be a good or a bad thing. I'm not sure.
So let's stay on the sales topic for a moment. What would you say that the biggest rejection statement you get is, and how do you overcome that?
The biggest rejection statement, if I'm understanding the question correctly, probably the most difficult thing to me is when I see a program that I know is very bad, yet the company or the customer says, I've had my water treatment guy in here for 10 years or some crazy long number, and they're not even willing to look at anything different. And to me, that's the hardest obstacle to overcome. Now, it's not impossible, but typically it's one of those things where you just have to say, okay, well, here's a few things that I noticed that I would be doing differently. Give me a call if you still have these issues a year from now, and then I'll touch base then. To me, that's the most frustrating and the most difficult is, but that's sales. It's a relationship game, and I get that. But it is frustrating when I see a poorly run water treatment program that seems to be low-hanging fruit, but there's just a huge barrier to entry there.
What would you say that you see more often than others that other water treatment companies could do a better job with?
Well, I think you and I both agree on this one. A big one is corrosion coupons. Now, I understand that that's not always the water treatment company's fault, in that some of it comes down to the customer not wanting to retrofit a plumbing or anything like that. So there are some obstacles that, require the water treatment company really having to be persistent on the customer and getting them to make that change. But, that's a big one. You're testing your calcium and all your normal tests that give you a relatively good indication of what the scaling potential of a system might be, but it's very difficult in your monthly testing to discern whether or not you may be corroding the system. And that's, a huge, huge portion of water treatment. It's not just scaling, it's that. So probably that would be one thing that I see as I guess room for improvement for a lot of water treatment companies.
Yeah, even when I do some consulting and people ask me to look at service reports, and I will look to see if they have corrosion coupon reports to go along with those, they'll say, well, the customer's not allowing us to put a corrosion coupon rack in. But as I go through the service reports, I don't see where they've even made that recommendation or put the comment in that the customer has rejected that recommendation. So you are right. The water treater may not be responsible for that, but if we can't back that up and something happens, you want to make sure that everything that happens goes in that service report. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, if there's something that I feel really needs to be changed, I'm emphasizing it in every single report. That way, if something ever does happen that could happen, based off them not following my recommendation, it's right there in writing every single month or however often the service visits are, stating, this could be a potential issue and here's how we can fix it, or at least understand what's going on. And if they choose to ignore it, I guess that's on them.
Yeah, as long as it's documented, hopefully we're making their program better by being there and working as a partner with them, but it's got to be a give and take on both sides.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned earlier that you are involved with the Association of Water Technologies, and just by participating, you've been able to gain a lot more than you've given. So a lot of people are thinking, well, is there any benefit to actually participating in the AWT? What am I ever going to get back? So my hope was you could speak around that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a place where I guess the industry leaders are gathering, or at least a good chunk of them are gathering and sharing thoughts and trying to lift the industry and progress it in ways that, in numerous ways. There's the TRTM that I mentioned earlier. That's great. There's the technical trainings, of course, the convention. And so just by being around all that and seeing where the industry's headed and seeing what the people who have been extremely successful in their careers and gained a whole wealth of knowledge throughout their careers, what they're doing, that's important. I think that you can take a lot from your observations just by being in the presence of these people and trying to figure out, okay, how did they get to where they are? Now, the other piece of that is you can directly build relationships with these same people that are then going to translate in you having another resource to learn from. And then, of course, I've gotten involved now with the education committee. There's a new STEM committee and that I'm a part of, and then also the online service tech training. And just again, by being involved with all of that, it's a great way just to hear how everyone else in the industry is thinking and how they approach problems. And I think that that's valuable.
Now, I know a lot of people are intimidated to step up and say, hey, I want to volunteer. How did you do that?
I was just at the very first, probably the first training I was at. I immediately knew that, this is something I want to be involved with, and I think I just started asking questions. I'm not sure that I actually volunteered then, but it was in the back of my mind. I think really the first time I decided to volunteer was at the convention in Nashville. I think, Trace, we got breakfast, and, it came up that you were a part of the education committee, and I think right after that I signed up, and from that point forward I've now been involved in, a few different things, including the education committee.
Yeah, and you've done a lot of great things on the education committee. We're now doing the online service tech training, and you're doing your fair share of that, I might add.
Yeah, it's been a fun project, though. I get a lot out of it, and as you and the other AWT trainers can attest to, teaching and going through the process of writing a curriculum is a great way to learn yourself. So I mean, yes, it's I guess giving back and volunteering, but selfishly I get a whole heck of a lot out of it. So it's been a good experience.
Well, you mentioned the convention, and I know a lot of people go to convention, and a lot of people don't know if they should go to convention. And going to the convention where all the business owners are, where every single supplier is, might be intimidating to some. So can you give a few tips on how somebody who's new in the industry can get the most out of the AWT convention?
Yeah, I think the starting point is to recognize that it's not nearly as intimidating as it may seem, and just to kind of let your guard down and be okay with sounding, I guess for lack of a better word, dumb. You don't have to be the expert to be there. In fact, probably as a non-expert there, you're going to get a lot more out of it than most other people. And so to me, I just love walking around and talking to whoever is manning the booths. Playing, a lot of times I just play dumb and ask a lot of questions, even if I think they're stupid questions, because I want to challenge my assumptions. So I'll just, if I think, if I don't understand something or I'm wondering why a company may be doing, applying their technology in a certain way, I think that just asking the question why, there's no harm in that. So I guess stepping out of your comfort zone and realizing that it's okay to ask questions is a huge piece to that. And then the other side of it is, going into some of the white paper presentations and the learning lounges, you can kind of hide in those. So if you really don't want to put yourself out there, those can be still a really good resource to take advantage of while you're at the convention without really, having to feel intimidated.
Well, that's a great tip. And for those of you that do want to put yourselves out there, we're going to try to do some live broadcast, or at least live recordings. Does that make sense? Live recordings? Can I say that? But we're going to try to interview some people at the convention, as well as some people that are in the vendor trade show, so we can see what's going on at the convention this year. So hopefully that works out well.
I think that's a great idea. There's a lot of knowledge concentrated at the convention, probably more so than at the technical trainings, just simply due to the fact that not only do you have the same people that are teaching the technical trainings at the convention, but you also have the rest of the committee members, you have the board, you have all of the suppliers and who they want there to represent their company. And the supplier side of things, they have a lot of knowledge, of course, in the things that they're trying to supply to the industry. So there's just a huge concentration of knowledge, and I think it's a great place to be.
Yeah, Conor, I think you were with me when somebody came up and asked me during a convention, how come we do not have technical trainings at the convention? And it's simply because we want to go to the convention too. So if we were there training, we weren't able to see all the wonderful things that the AWT convention has to offer. So we offer it twice a year, but not at convention. Conor, what would you say your number one tip would be to a new water treater?
My number one tip to a new water treater, I think really the first and most important thing is to always be educating yourself. There's so much to learn in this industry, and there's a lot of resources out there. So every night when you're done at the end of the workday, after training or however you're starting with your company, continue that when you're home. It's easy to, I guess, accelerate the progression if you're doing that, because before you don't know what you don't know. But as you start to build a little bit of a base, you start to realize, okay, here's some of the things that are out there that I need to educate myself on, and then you can be a little bit more targeted in the approach. But at the beginning, it's just trying to learn as much as possible, as fast as possible. That way you can really start to isolate down what it is that you need to be focused on, if that makes sense.
Conor, on a previous episode, I mentioned on a boiling point that a lot of people don't test raw water. And when I ask them why they don't test for that, they tell me they don't have enough time to run all those tests. And I know through working with you, you were very diligent in learning every single test that you have in your kit, and also when to run what and how to organize things. Do you mind sharing with our listeners how you do that?
Yeah, I think, this actually ties back maybe into one of the things that frustrated me about the job, and that was what felt like wasted time or inefficiencies. And so with testing, when I first started, of course, and I'm learning, you're just kind of going down the list. And then it didn't take long for me to realize that, there's probably a better way to do this. So then I started really learning and understanding, okay, what is the test? What's the methodology? And is there a time limit between, when I take the sample and when I actually have to run it? So that's kind of how I approach it now, trying to condense down that testing into the shortest amount of time possible so I can get back out there doing the things, that I love, offering technical support and really sales. That's probably my favorite part of the job is the actual, technical selling. So what I do is really I make sure I grab all of my samples at once, so I'm not running back and forth. I make sure I get enough of a sample. Nothing frustrates me more than getting halfway through the service visit and then having to go back and grab another sample, especially if it's a boiler sample and they don't have a sample cooler and it's a whole fiasco. So that's the starting point, and then of course, is there something that needs to be tested right away? Free chlorine residual or your sulfite on the boiler, something that, by waiting, you could skew your results. That always comes first. And then after that, I start the tests that take the longest, and have the reactions going or whatever may, be needed for that. And then once those are going, then I start to fill in the rest of the time sequentially, just in terms of everything else that's relatively, takes relatively the same amount of time. And then hopefully, by the end, when I'm finished with everything else, the other reactions are finishing up, I can finalize that test, record my results, talk to the person before I leave, and, get out of there in a timely manner.
Those are some great tips. Have you ever timed yourself and said, okay, I'm going to see if I can shave 2 minutes off of this?
I've never actually set a stopwatch, but I typically know, roughly how long the entire visit should take, or the quickest I've ever gotten out of there. So I'm a pretty competitive person. And so I definitely pay attention to that and want to at least, make that happen. And sometimes I get myself into trouble, though, because I'll schedule my day assuming I'm going to hit that record time at most of the accounts, and then I end up working, a longer day than I intended. But no, I think it's a lot of fun to try and keep things competitive, even if it's just trying to be as efficient as possible in testing. But that's one of the things that I that helps me get through the service component.
Yeah, I'm always amazed at the number of water treaters out there that consider the account serviced just because they ran tests. And you say that the best part is working with the customer and giving technical advice, and I can't agree with you more.
Yeah, the testing itself is, to me, it's just a means to the end, right? I want to be making sure that I know what I'm talking about and have the knowledge when I do go to the customer, but I really like taking all the inputs and variables and understanding what's going on, and then being able to, teach that to the customer or share what we're seeing in the system and how that may be improved or is evidence that we are doing what we said we would when we took over the account.
That's interesting. When I work with people, a lot of people are scared to give up what they covet as their own knowledge to the customer, but it sounds like you're saying the more knowledge that you help them get, the better the account's going to be and the more successful everybody's going to be.
Yeah, maybe this is a little bit contrary to the typical, water treatment industry as a whole, but I'm a big fan of transparency and sharing that knowledge, and I've seen how much there is out there, how long it takes, and how much dedication, so I'm not worried about the customer knowing it all or knowing more than me. So to me, the more educated a customer is, the better off I am in terms of retaining the business or picking up the business, because I want to make sure that they understand and value the knowledge.
All right, Conor. Well, now comes the lightning round part of our interview. Are you ready for this?
Oh, I better be, huh?
All right. So first question, what are the last 3 books that you've read?
The last 3 books that I've read. So I kind of have a problem of starting a lot of books and reading them all simultaneously. So the last one that I finished was a book called The One Thing, and that's a business book. I believe the author is Gary Keller. But basically it talks about, figuring it out, what the one thing you can do every day is that will make everything else easier. and that's obviously an extreme simplification of the book, but I think it's a useful book to read to then apply it to your personal life or your business to really understand where it is you should be spending your time. So that was a good one. I'm also reading one of the Game of Thrones books right now. I think it's the fourth or fifth one. I should know that off the top of my head. I think it's the fourth one. And I held out and didn't watch any of the Game of Thrones shows, and I still haven't because I wanted to read the books first because I don't like reading the books after watching. And I know the book is always better. So that's another one. And then I just started a book last night. I think it's called Continental Divide, and it's this is going to sound really dry to most of you, but it's a history of the United States told through the prism of mountaineering. So basically the history of mountaineering in the United States, starting with, accounts of people climbing some of the mountains on the East Coast in the 1600s. So I think that's kind of always interesting. I'm a big fan of the outdoors and the mountains. So it's cool to read about, people 400 years ago doing some of the things that I enjoy doing now.
Well, it's a very well-rounded reading list. That's just about every topic there is.
Yeah, I try not to get stuck in one category because I think that it's important to draw knowledge from across different disciplines, and I think that just helps in all aspects of life. And I learned things in history books that I can apply to business, of course, and my professional career, and then fiction. I always like to have a fiction book because it allows me to turn my mind off before I go to bed. So usually I'll read fiction for like 45, 30 minutes before I go to bed. That way I'm not thinking about what I have to do the next day or what I did today from a work standpoint when I'm going to bed.
Well, I cannot believe you have not seen any of the television show Game of Thrones. That's one of my favorite things.
Yeah, I know. I'm excited to be able to reward myself once I'm done with the books. So I guess I better start reading.
I can actually tie water treatment and Game of Thrones back. I was doing some consulting with some people, and of course all the real work is done at the bar. And somebody asked me a question about what was going on, and I answered it, and he looked at me, "How on earth did you know that?" So I use a tyranny quote. I said, "That's what I do. I drink and I know things." But you wouldn't know that because you haven't seen the show.
But I read the books, and I don't remember that quote, so maybe I'm either not there yet or I'm not reading close enough.
So if they were to make a movie about Conor Parrish, who would play you?
Oh, gosh, I feel like this is such a loaded question because you can come across so poorly depending on who you say.
Oh, yes, there will be lots of judgment.
Right.
Absolutely.
So, gosh, I'm trying to think if someone's ever told me someone that would fit that. And no one's coming to mind. And truthfully, my knowledge of pop culture is pretty poor, so I don't have a whole lot of names to pull from here. Why don't we go with Jason Statham, because he seems pretty cool.
Fair enough. So my last question for you, Conor, and you've been a great guest. I really appreciate you being here. Last question is, if you could have a conversation with anyone throughout history, who would it be and why?
I've been trying to come up with a really intellectual answer for this, or something that, because I've had this question asked me before, and I always struggle over it. And of course the usual suspects come to mind, and I was going to say Ben Franklin, but of course Tom said that in episode 3, so I feel like that's cheating if I say the same thing. So now it's like, okay, who would I meet that's not Ben Franklin or one of the usual, U.S. history people? And then I looked, and actually another book I'm reading is Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And so I think Marcus Aurelius will be my answer because, in reading this book, which really wasn't intended to be published publicly, you kind of get into the head of, at the time, the most powerful person in the world, and how he's writing every night to himself to be a good person, and to treat people with respect and things like that. So I think it's really interesting how, in a time, in an era back then when you, I guess, view it with such, I guess, maybe negativity in terms of how they treated people. And I'm not saying that, he's the perfect case of how to treat people, but I think it's interesting that someone in his position back then was reflecting daily in ways to improve himself and how he treats people.
All right. Well, hey, I think it's been fun. I hope people out there have learned a lot from what you've been able to talk about, and I really appreciate you being on the show today.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate being invited to be on here, and I think it's a great thing that you're starting this, and I'm excited to see where it goes because I think it's going to be very successful.
Well, I hope you've enjoyed today's show. A couple of things I want to remind you about. The first thing is the Association of Water Technology's annual convention and exposition is coming up September 13th through 16th. So if you have not made your reservations to attend the show, please, when you finish this podcast, make sure that's the next thing that you do. Early registration is ending soon. You don't want to pay more for something just simply because you lacked planning for it. So make sure you make those reservations. Make sure you make your hotel reservations. Those book up quickly. And you want to make sure you stay at the host hotel because there's a lot going on there. Second thing I want you to do is I want you to tell me what you think about this show, what you want to hear about. I get all my ideas from you. So go to scalinguph2o.com. Tell me what you think. Tell me what you want to hear. By the way, telling me what you want to hear isn't free consulting. I don't mind helping you guys out if you have a couple of questions. But keep in mind, that's how I make my living. So please let me know what you want to hear about the show. And if you have a specific problem, I'll try to help you out one-to-one as best as I can. That being said, it's been a lot of fun today. I hope you've learned something. I hope you're going to try something new that you haven't tried before. And I hope you're going to be a better water treater tomorrow than you were today. Thanks for joining us on Scale.